Hey all, wow, it has been a while. I haven't worked on a video in over a month. Yikes. To be fair, I've been pretty busy. School started again, and of course college always takes up a lot of my time, plus this is my senior year, so that's even busier. But I was also working on another project. All of my free time lately has gone into sewing because I was working on turning out a bunch of merchandise for my first convention. You see, over the summer I started an Etsy shop and an Etsy business, selling cosplay cloaks and plushies and plushie pillows and stuff like that. And so recently I started tabling at cons. Incidentally, if you're interested in checking any of that stuff out, the link to my Etsy shop, The Cloakery, is down in the comments below. But now I need to get back on track with videos. I had a ton of videos planned before going AWOL, and so I really should get back to the oh holy cow there's a new Banana Fish opening. Okay, skip all that. Banana Fish it is. Because goddamn, I thought the first opening was a lot, and feels, but this one, I can't. Okay, let's talk about this one, talk about the feels, and see if we can get through the whole video without me starting to cry. Welcome one and all, I'm Coriander Stone, and today we will be breaking down Freedom by Blue & Count, the second opening of Banana Fish.
I've been knowing everyone, I've been wondering around, I've been to see everything at a time.
Before we get started, I want to make one thing clear. This might as well be called Subtext the Opening. Many OPs, such as Reason Living and Banana Fish's first opening, Found and Lost, are a kind of a mix between subtext and subtle spoilers, with a more stock standard opening formula that just gives you a fun time, even if you don't really know the context of what's going on. They have their character shots, they've got their action set pieces, and they've got a few fun transitions in between. This opening gives us none of that. It's subtext and feels all the way down, and you can't fail to notice that, even watching it casually. So let's dive right in. We open with this shot of Ash lost in the dark. Specifically, we begin with Ash's eye. Eyes, in the traditional metaphor, are windows to the soul. This is very clearly an image of how Ash's soul was drowning in the darkness before the beginning of the series. It's paired with the English lyrics, "I've been ignoring everything, I've been wandering around, I've been deceived everything at that time." Grammatically correct or not, these words fit perfectly with the image of Ash lost in the darkness, at least until the light dawns on him, the series begins, and he meets Eiji. It's been long since established in the series that Eiji is the light in the darkness of Ash's world, and that light is what breaks across him now, spinning out across the city and allowing him to come into the light himself. This is again reflected in the English lyrics, "Then you appear in front of me, igniting my pale heart. We've been looking for each other from now on." And we see Ash standing, casting a long shadow, emphasizing the role he plays in changing the city around him, and looking out over a city lightened by the light that is Eiji, a light filled with possibility. Of course, that possibility can't last because this is tragedy and this is Banana Fish. The camera pans up as they're reaching for the light, only to have that light transition through the word "save you" into a scroll of buildings. Dark, towering buildings that drown out the light of the sky are something that we're familiar with from the first OP, and they mean the same thing here, drowning out the hope of the light ideal city, pulling Ash back into the darkness. But there's slightly more to this shot, because just before we scroll upward, we see the city itself, reflected and upside down, coming out of the sky. It's an interesting image, showing how Ash's attempts to save Eiji will literally turn the city upside down, but also how ultimately doing so still traps him in the darkness. Oh right, yeah, spoilers. Meant to put this in here earlier, but spoiler warning to the maximum. If you don't know exactly every excruciating detail of how the series ends, please, for the love of all that's holy, do not watch this video until the anime has finished airing. I will be going so deep into spoilers territory, and you, trust me, do not want to know. With that pleasantness out of the way, let's continue. From here we get 3 absolutely breathtaking scenery shots. That's one thing this opening does amazingly well. Just the art in its landscapes is absolutely top tier fabulous, and we get 6 of these shots throughout the OP. The first one of these shots is the Statue of Liberty lost in sunset. In the first OP, the Statue of Liberty meant Eiji and the lighter world that Eiji brought Ash into. So seeing Liberty itself silhouetted at sunset can do nothing good for the series or for Ash. Essentially, it means an end to the possibility of freedom that Eiji represented to Ash, as well as in its representation of the city of New York, an end to the story set in that place. The next shot is a brief one of the snows of Kilimanjaro and the leopard climbing up the mountain. This is the big metaphor of both the OP and the second half of the series. To recap from the anime thus far, Ash has read the book called The Snows of Kilimanjaro, and in it, a leopard climbs to the top of the mountain. Ash is entranced by the leopard who climbs to the top of the mountain to die, and it becomes a metaphor for Ash throughout the second half of the series, with Eiji twice attempting to tell Ash that he is not the leopard, that he has the choice to come down from the mountain, and with Ash ultimately not being able to do that. The image of the Statue of Liberty, with the sunset around it, the Statue of Liberty symbolizing the freedom of Eiji, replaced by the image of Ash as the leopard, as Ash's fate, tells us very clearly exactly how this series is going to end, as well as telling us what the OP is going to be centering around thematically. The next image is of a flight of birds. Birds mean Eiji, we've long since established that, and sure enough, Eiji comes into focus. In a blue sky of the birds, but surrounded by falling feathers. It's interesting. Eiji is not actually shown with the birds, showing that he is in some way looking after the birds, having lost some of the freedom that he was associated with. An idea which is confirmed by the lyric, "The Infinite Sacrifice." Eiji has given up a lot over the course of the series, and at the end will give up something crucial, or rather lose something crucial, which will mean that he is never quite free in the same way again. Incidentally, notice how Ash's introduction lyrics were all in English while Eiji's switches to Japanese, representing the languages that are native to our two main characters. Clever how that's done. Incidentally, this isn't done for the rest of the opening. English and Japanese are mixed freely around the two characters, showing the way in which their worlds mix and intertwine. See what I meant when I called this subtext the opening? Next, we get 3 more absolutely stunning shots in time-lapse, all of places in New York City. The first one is the one I want to draw particular attention to, because the way the buildings are shown in the rain with the light coming down, reflecting itself off the pavement, gives us a sense that things are changing and time is passing both in the underground and on the surface world. Since this theme of underground and surface world is big in Banana Fish, and in its openings, it's interesting to see the two worlds brought together like this, suggesting that one event has brought a big change both to the underground of the criminals and also to the freer world represented by Eiji. And after this event occurs, time passes. That's what these shots all really show. Time lapse, time passing, years even. At the end of this time lapse, we see a familiar face, Sing, staring up into the light just as he was in the last OP. This time he's no longer with his gang and instead is surrounded by the feathers that represent Eiji. In other words, despite the time lapse, despite how much time passes, he is still connected to Eiji. It's interesting because the bird feathers flying metaphor is one that's usually used to connect Ash and Eiji, but here it's used to connect Sing and Eiji, almost as if Sing is now the one being drawn up into the light by Eiji. And I've been talking around spoilers for exactly long enough. Guardian of Light. We're talking about Guardian of Light. This is an allusion to Guardian of Light. The time passes between the end of the series and Guardian of Light, and Sing and Eiji are still connected in Guardian of Light, while all the references to tragedy and sorrow are references to Ash's inevitable death. Incidentally, if we had any hopes, even the slightest, that Mappa was going to change the ending, this right here, all this stuff, yeah, no, they're not changing it. Hope over. Prepare for incoming tears. But returning to Sing before I move on, the line that plays while he's on screen is the blurry ideals, a line very emblematic of Sing struggling with his ideals and morals over the second half of the series as he's torn between his loyalties to Shorter, Ash, and Lau. We return to Ash clenching his fist in determination and swearing not to let everyone's sacrifices go to waste. From there we move into this interesting shot of Ash facing a darker version of himself. The idea that there are two Ashes, the lighter one that spends time with Eiji and the dark one who kills without consequence, is something that's a theme throughout the series, and so that's what we see reflected here, only there's a bit of an interesting twist to it. The dark, mirrory surface that Ash is reflected against is, well, I can't be sure, but it looks an awful lot like hardened coal to me. At least that's what it brings to mind, coal or ash. In other words, contrasting the Ash Link's identity, the dark one, with Aslan Jade Calendris, which is the much lighter identity that he would have had if he hadn't gone through all his darkened trauma. Then we see the two sides of his life try to meet, try to touch, try to reach for each other, and suddenly it all shatters. The hardened coal revealing to be as thin as glass. breaking apart all around him. It's interesting that we see the shattering from both sides. In other words, trying to bring these two worlds together, trying to have both, is what breaks everything apart. Trying to have a light life with Eiji as well as still being embroiled in darkness and wars is what shatters everything for him. Again, paraphrasing Blanca, that Ash could either let go and keep living, or find it and hold it and be destroyed. And this shattering is what loses Ash in the snow as the fragments turn to snow, as in the snows of Kilimanjaro. That's what snow means in this entire opening. We never actually see snow in the series. Instead, it's a visual representation of how Ash is now too far up the mountain to turn back, how he's become the leopard, destined to freeze to death at the top of the mountain. And speaking of freezing to death, we get to the first half of the feelsy meat of the OP. I promised myself I wasn't going to cry talking about this, but damn, this gets me every time. We see Ash walking through the snow, walking up the mountain, and as he does, we see flashing before his eyes his whole life, specifically the parts that have meant the most to him. It's the classic in the moments before death approach. The time before his trauma when he was with his brother Griff, the time when he got to feel like a normal teenager again when he hung out with Shorter and Eiji, Shorter, his best friend who died because of Ash getting him involved, and then we get Ash's face writ in sorrow and determination as he looks back on all of this and sees only one way forward. And as he walks, we see this one little movie theater sign here, and I want to draw your guys' attention to it, because it's very important. The word on the sign is land, which can have a couple of meanings here. First, it can be talking about land as in this place. This is Ash's place. The city that brings him life and brings him death, because the series does talk a bit about that, at least Yut Lung does talk about how New York is Ash's home and Ash's place. But it means more than that. Land comes as the opposite of sky, the opposite of flight, the thing you do when you're no longer flying. Again, cutting away Eiji to reveal Ash alone on the mountaintop. But there's one more thing too. Two of the letters on this sign are lit up while the other two are not. Looking at it, I tried to find a word and then suddenly realized what I was seeing. AD. Not part of a word, not an, but the letters AD, which in our current calendar system stand for the words after death. I'll give you a minute to let that sink in. Yep, Mappa and their eye for detail has done it again. This sign over here casually being like, hey, after death, after Ash's death. We're leading up to Ash's death in this scene, and by the way, Ash is going to die, just in case you hadn't noticed. Because of course this part is a look back at Ash's life through the lens of those two shots of Eiji and Sing, which are both references to Guardian of Light in many ways, which of course occurs AD, after Ash's death. We transfer from there to Yut Lung, which is an interesting shot because we start with this very red, vivid shot of Yut Lung's hair tie, the red thread which connects people's fate and connects people. In other words, tying Yut Lung and Ash irrevocably together, but also tying Yut Lung to Ash's inevitable death. Thanks, by the way, because of course it is ultimately his fault considering that he was the one who put Lao on that particular path. After his shot, emphasizing his newfound power with his servant and his peacocks of opulence and wealth, we get the shot that all the fandom was waiting for, Blanca's introduction. Blanca starts out looking at Yut Lung and following him onto the screen, indicating how he works for Yut Lung and how he was instrumental in executing Yut Lung's plan to take down Ash, but then he pulls a quite literal 180, going to face Ash instead, indicating how he ultimately switches sides. The height differential between Ash and Blanca in this scene and the way Ash struggles toward him from a kneeling position shows us the power differentiation, that Blanca is the one character in the series who's actually stronger and a better shot than Ash. Ash struggles to attack Blanca. He is in this scene dressed in a white t-shirt. White, emblematic of purity, is also the color we see Eiji in throughout this OP. In other words, Ash is attacking Blanca in order to protect Eiji. An idea reflected perfectly in the lyric, "I wanted to save you despite all that." But then, before Ash can land a punch, he is surrounded by snow again. His destiny catches up with him, and he's thrust back into that earlier scene, back climbing up the mountain, but this time with some extra feels, as we see Ash stumbling through the snow up the mountain, clutching his side, after being stabbed by Lau in the few minutes before he dies. You know, because they had to put that in the opening. They actually had to put that in the opening. They actually had to put the best character in the series dying right in the OP. I'm not crying. You're crying. In this shot, we see Ash desperately trying to reach Eiji despite his injuries. Despite everything, the image of Eiji appears in his mind, and it's the last thing he's thinking about as he's dying. Eiji is, again, in white, representing purity and also representing this sort of new repurification, the new world of freedom that Ash is longing for, and that his wound and the dark colors he's wearing indicates that he will never have. And if, that wasn't that enough, every time Ash appears in this snow scene, whether it's the first time or now, the lyrics are, "Get away from me, get away from dark nightmare." Emblematic of Ash's feelings that he's only dragging the people he loves further and further into hell, that every time someone gets close to him, they will just be destroyed, that he thinks Eiji will be safer if he pushes him away. And again, we see all the people he feels like he's affected this way. Griff, who was shot because he was involved with Ash. Shorter, who was blackmailed, tortured, and killed, again because of his connection to Ash. And Eiji, who's been through hell, shot twice, kidnapped, and a whole lot of other things, again because of his connections to Ash. And even as he's dying, even as he's losing himself in the snow, this is still how Ash is thinking. Because, ow. And speaking of ow, our next shot is ripped right out of the manga and right out of the feels. Ash and Eiji coming toward each other, Ash above and Eiji below. They reach out for each other and are torn apart. This is their final meeting in the hospital. Eiji and Ash desperately reaching out for each other before Eiji tells Ash to run in order to keep him from being caught by Charlie. And the lyric here, we don't want to go through that again, has to do with both Ash and Eiji and their fear of separation, and also, what this is doing to the fandom. But of course the scene has more to it than just that. Firstly, there's the way in which this is the backdrop for the other scene of Ash in the snow, indicating that this is, again, the backdrop of what Ash is thinking about and feeling as he goes to his death. And secondly, the way in which Ash and Eiji reach out for each other mimics and mirrors the famous painting by Michelangelo of God and Adam reaching for each other. Ash is a sort of Superman figure. He is stronger and faster and smarter and cleverer and more cunning and more beautiful than everyone else. Again, a theme repeatedly touched on throughout the series. And so he is this sort of godlike figure within the narrative. At the same time, just as Eiji has supported him, he has also been there for Eiji. He's the one who brought Eiji out of his depression and brought him back to life in America, which is, again, a theme throughout the series. But unlike in the painting, Ash and Eiji's hands do not meet, do not touch. God is unable to pass that spark to Adam, and the withdrawing of that power, of that presence, is absolutely devastating. Devastation, which is what Eiji goes through after Ash's death. In the final scene, we see Ash overcoming the horror of that final shattering of his final meeting with Eiji to face off against Dino, just as he does in the series. Interestingly enough, Ash is now dressed in red. His hoodie in the first OP was blue, while Eiji's sweater was red, so this sort of connects him back to Eiji, but it also shows him in a bloody red, indicating how much more violent he has become over the course of the series, how many more lives he has taken, and how he has stopped hesitating before he shoots, as opposed to his slightly more pacifistic way of looking at things at the first couple of episodes. Perhaps this is also an indication of the fact that he's willing to kill anyone if it's for Eiji. The opening ends briefly on a very satisfying note with Ash raising his gun to point it at Dino, while the lyrics go, "Get away from me." I think the message in that one is pretty goddamn clear. But it doesn't end there. Just as the manga doesn't end with the happiness of Ash overcoming Dino, and there's more to tragedy after that event, so too the opening can't end with that defiant shot of Ash, but rather has to fade us into feels again, because, that's the whole point. The post-Dino story isn't exactly a happy one. Ash's defiance fades into the darkness, a darkness of a mixture of ashes and snow. Incidentally, I have to say that's a really clever way of bringing in the opening, mixing the snow of Ash's fate with the ashes that are a literal representation of his name. Tying them together irrevocably in the name Banana Fish, the thing that has brought him to this place.
Get away from me.
Overall, I just freaking love this opening. Everything about it is absolutely spectacularly done in a way that hits all of my feels. With both the OPs and the EDs, Mappa has just consistently delivered excellence, and that's what I'm expecting for the rest of the series. Speaking of, I've got at least one more Banana Fish video in the works because, you know, I freaking love this series, and there will probably be more beyond that. But I'm also going to try to get back to some of the other stuff that I was planning to work on, or already had in the works, such as that Legend of the Galactic Heroes Tragedy video, a couple reviews, a disability in anime video, and of course I'm also a couple months behind on anime to A to Z. I even had a Halloween special planned and everything, but well, Banana Fish. If you're interested in any of the videos I have planned coming up, please go ahead and subscribe so you'll be sure to catch those. If you're interested, my other Banana Fish opening analysis is over on my channel, and if you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and a comment. Also, if you want to hear me talk more about Banana Fish beyond just the one more video I have planned, please let me know down in the comments, and if you think I missed anything or interpreted anything differently than I did, again, please let me know. I'm always happy to hear about those things. This is Coriander Stone, and I thank you for watching. L. Psi Congru.